Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I'm very sorry to bother you like this, but I had recently made a video, or I tried to, talking about JAWS 3D, and for certain technical reasons, it didn't turn out as well as I wanted it to, so I decided to abandon that video for now, maybe in the hopes of perhaps trying to make another video in the future talking about JAWS 3D. But rather than delete the footage that I had shot in the attempt in trying to make that video, I had instead decided to just upload that unedited footage and treat it as a bonus video or deleted scenes or something like that, and I just uploaded it on YouTube. And I received a number of responses from JAWS sequel lovers, and it's a nice group to be. It's not group because I'd like to say that I'm also with you for those of you who are fans of the JAWS sequels. So just let me make this message addressed to you, fans of the JAWS sequels. So this is, of course, going to mention spoilers for the JAWS films. So for anyone who hasn't seen the JAWS films, just be wary of that. So I'm going to be mentioning some specifics about all the JAWS films. JAWS, maybe JAWS 2, JAWS 3, JAWS 4, The Revenge, potentially anyway. So I just want to let you know that I am with you. I'm a big fan of the JAWS sequels. I love JAWS, the Steven Spielberg film, but you don't need me to tell you what a great masterpiece that is, and it still holds up so well to this day. But the JAWS sequels were something that were a big part of my childhood growing up. I mentioned JAWS 3 and how it had affected me when I was little. The same is true for JAWS 2. JAWS 2 was a really popular rental item among my friends and me. And so whenever we have, let's say, a movie night or sleepover or something like that, friends, at someone's house, and we'd have the opportunity to rent a video from the VHS store, the video rental store. So oftentimes we would rent JAWS 2 because that was such a fun, exciting, scary, somewhat bloody film. There are some really great elements to it, and some really quirky, fascinating character elements to it as well. Maybe one of these days I'll talk about JAWS 2 and how it affected me. But I guess one of the mysteries about JAWS 2 that I to this day I'm not quite sure what happened is towards the end, just before the boat reaches Cable Junction, or the boats reach Cable Junction, the shark attacks again. And some of the kids fall into the water. And one of the teenage girls is Lucy. I think her name is Lucy. And the shark goes towards her. But rather than attack her, it just kind of swims past her and doesn't really attack her at all. I think it does. I think maybe she was injured a little bit, but it's not, she was still alive, and she was able to make it to the rock face of Cable Junction. And I think her boyfriend, goes and tries to save her, and he's like, Lucy, Lucy, and tries to grab onto her, but then she's shocked and she's panicking, so in fact the boyfriend makes her panic even more. So I thought that was an interesting character moment. But I always wondered that Lucy was very, very lucky, considering the circumstances of that particular moment, especially considering up to now we had so many deaths. But anyway, that's the mystery of Lucy. So I don't quite, it's still a mystery that I haven't been able to figure out the answer to. But in any event, my friends, the JAWS 2 and the design of the shark and the scars and the helicopter, and I love the bit when the helicopter is about to take off and suddenly the shark attacks, and one of the first thing that the helicopter pilot does, he doesn't try to maneuver the helicopter. No, what he does, there's a shot of his hands on the glass trying to, like, panicking, which I thought was a really absurd yet human moment, because it was like, this is a sign of sheer panic. If a helicopter pilot in that position, and he was still in the position where I think he could have maneuvered himself out of it, kind of, maybe, but if he's in a position that early on to have his hands, his instinct would have his hands beyond the glass saying, get me out of here, then you know that he's in big trouble. So I thought that was a really great thing. And then you hear over the music, which is so bombastic and orchestrally just over the top magnificent. and then you hear the scream of the helicopter pilot. Ah, God, you know, remember that? That was a scary moment. And I remember when the helicopter goes down into the water and the blades, and the kids on the raft there. I thought they had showed really good wherewithal. I think it was Larry, the mayor's son. Larry, is that his name? Larry Jr. And the blades, and he knew to duck, because he could anticipate the fact that if the blades were to hit the water, then they would break off and they could fling, and the projectile could potentially injure them. So he had the wherewithal to know to duck his head or something like that. I think that was it. So yeah, he was a really interesting character. And I remember later, I think it was that moment when the shark attacks and his friend Bob falls into the water. He's like, that was his name, right? He's like, Bob. And then later, moments later, Sean falls in the water, and everyone's like, Sean, Sean, Sean. So no one's thinking about Bob. Only he's thinking about, he's the only guy who shouts Bob. But everyone's like, Sean, Sean, Sean. So I always thought, he cared about his friend Bob. So and I love and same guy Bob, right at the end at Cable Junction when after the shark has been electrocuted. I love Bob's reaction on the rock face, and that's him, right? And he's like this. He's, oh, thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. I love that moment, and that's exactly what I think I would do in that situation, is just be on the rock face, just be totally depleted of energy, but just saying thank you over and over again. But Jaws 2, there was Jaws 2, and I spoke a little bit about Jaws 3, and then Jaws 4. So Jaws 4 was a film that I'd heard about, and in fact my Mom took me to see Jaws 4 in the theater. So Jaws the Revenge. So I saw Jaws the Revenge in the theater. The theater wasn't packed, but it wasn't completely empty either. At least that's what I remember. And I remember seeing the film, and while there are some parts of it that I acknowledge are quite ludicrous, there are some parts that I think are very effective, such that I think Jaws 4 it's not a wholly terrible film. I think it's quite effective in a number of places, and so I understand how people might criticize the film and have criticisms of it. I understand those wholeheartedly, but when I remember seeing the film, and I thought the character of Jake was very, very lovable. And what happens to Jake at the end was so shocking and so sad. And this is the print. The theater experience I saw was the version with the ending that had the shark and the whole thing with the it gets the thing in the neck and it sinks, and you see the shark fall into the vastness of the ocean depths, and that's it. And then it cuts to them going into the airplane, and that's the end of the film. So you don't see the alternate ending, which I saw much later, which was Jake still alive. And so I ended the film, the theatrical experience anyway, thinking that Jake had died, which is a bummer for me, because I really liked his character. So when I saw the film again, however many years later it was, I don't know, on TV or rental or something, and then I saw this ending, I thought, this is a wholly different film from what I remember seeing in the theater. And I was very grateful for that, because as I say, that was Jake, and then later I noticed that this was obviously a water tank, and it wasn't a real ocean, because you could see in the distance it was actually the waves hitting the wall of the tank rather than the sky and the horizon. So you felt like a bit tacked on, so I could get that. But still, it was wonderful to see Jake back. Again, I'm not quite sure how he managed to get out of the situation, because it looked like he was in a very precarious situation in terms of being in the mouth of a shark, being drawn down into the depths of the ocean. But oh well, that's movie magic for you, I suppose. But there are some very memorable moments in the film Jaws the Revenge. I think the Ellen Brody character, when it's focusing in on her grief, I thought it was very effective. There's a moment when she's maybe laughing, and then suddenly it turns into crying. And I thought that was so poignant, and it was such a beautiful way to capture how she is trying to deal with the grief in terms of the death of her son, Sean. Speaking of which, the opening sequence of the film in Amity and the Christmas singing intercut with the death of Sean with the shark attack, and the arm and all this stuff, and the arm and the yellow raincoat and the darkness and the screaming and the editing and the red. I thought was very effective. This actually scared me a lot when I saw this, such that this is another moment in the Jaws films where if I see the film, that moment still chills me because it really affected me as a kid. So the death of Sean, that scene was very effective. But this led into, I remember also early on after Sean's death, and Michael and his family visit the mom, and we have the little girl Thea, and she says, suddenly we hear her voice saying, Uncle Sean is dead, or something like that. And I thought that was so very heavy. And so there are these moments that populate the film here and there. And then there's the character of what's his name, Hoagie, the Michael Caine character. And I must tell you that, remember the scene where where he lands the plane on the water, and he's walking out, and suddenly the shark attacks the plane, and he's just going back into the cockpit, and then the shark is just forcing the plane down. He's not really attacking it, more or less. He's just biting on it. It's just sinking. And it just sinks down and down, and then some time passes, and you think, oh my goodness, this lovable character, Hoagie, has perished in this very undignified way. And then suddenly, out of nowhere, we hear Hoagie's voice, and we see him climb onto the boat. And so and I know this has been this moment has been made fun of. For instance, I remember there is a Siskel and Ebert review where they're talking about how his clothes are dry, even though he's been swimming in the water. So why are his clothes dry? And that's a good point. I guess, but that's movie magic for you, I suppose. But the point that I wanted to bring up about this moment is that I remember in the theater. Again, I saw this film in the theater. I remember in the theater when Hoagie returns, and he's back, and he climbs back into the boat. I remember the people in the audience were clapping and cheering. They said, "Yeah, great, fantastic." And this was one of the earliest memories that I had in the theater growing up, where we had this actual interactive experience. In other words, this is one of the earliest memories that I had of a theater experience where I remember the audience clapping and cheering on a film. And it was the moment where Hoagie returns back from the brink in Jaws: The Revenge. And then so that this was, and I thought, oh my goodness, you can actually clap along with a film? I didn't realize you could do that. And so this was a big of an eye opener for me in terms of going to the theater and the theater decorum and manner, and the sort of unspoken rules of polite movie-going experiences. And I thought, this was great. This is really great. Again, then of course, I would go to films a lot, movie theaters a lot, then growing up. And of course, depending on the film, you'd have people cheering and clapping. But perhaps one of the earliest memories of that was Hoagie, the return of Hoagie in Jaws: The Revenge. And so in that way, I think it was it was a great experience. It was a great time. And again, I get all the criticism about the roar of the shark and how it just seems to be walking on the water out of nowhere, and the whole thing about the how it's revenge and it's following the Brody family and all. So I get that. But if you can sort of turn off that part of one's brain, or another way to put it is, if you can just go along with the film on those terms, then it's just a fun time. And again, you either can go along with it or not, and that's on the film. And the film's job is to do enough, to establish enough, to create enough of a basis for suspension of disbelief on the part of the audience. If it doesn't do that, then it hasn't done its job. If it's able to do that, even to a certain extent, then I think it works. And for me, I can say that for the most part, depending on my mood perhaps, but for the most part, I say that it does work. I am able to suspend my disbelief on these points. Also, I should say that I see Jaws: The Revenge as being a parallel film to Jaws 2, because we have a lot of similar parallel scenes in terms of like the attack on a ship. Here like an attack on the helicopter versus the attack on the airplane. We have the idea of the shark and sharks having thoughts and wanting to sort of have revenge against those who have wronged them. We had a little hint of that in Jaws 2. Remember where Brody is talking to the scientist, the marine biologist, and she says, sharks don't take things personally, Mr. Brody. But then, right, we see in Jaws 4 that sharks indeed take things personally. And in fact, there is a little hint in Jaws 2 that perhaps that shark was maybe coming into amity because of the first shark in the first one. Again, it's not fully explored in that way, but there's a little bit of a hint of that as to maybe that possibility was there, but it's not played up any further than that. But in Jaws the Revenge, I would say Jaws the Revenge is in many ways a follow-through of that particular element of the film, of Jaws 2. So it's taking that element, it seems to be expanding upon that. And again, it works for some, it probably doesn't work for others, maybe it doesn't work for many, I would say. But still, for those of whom for which this part of the film works, I think we can go along with it. It's just another excuse, a film excuse to set up the circumstances by which everything will follow. And as I say, there are moments that are quite shocking and very effective even to this day. And there's some laugh out loud moments. There's some really funny moments, and funny going along with the film, or funny at the expense of the film. And I think either way that's perfectly fine, because the film is doing its job in terms of entertainment and engaging its audience. And however one looks at the film, Jaws 4, and I don't claim it to be the greatest film I've ever seen, and I don't claim it to be the film that I visit the most often, but I do say that it's a film that I associate a certain set of memories and feelings. And so with that association, I am able to continue to watch it and still have some kind of experience with it that is a positive one. So I'm very and I feel that way in general about the Jaws sequels overall. So for those of you who are Jaws sequels fans, I don't know if there's a Jaws sequel fan club. If there is, I'd love to join, because I'm with you. I am a big fan of the Jaws sequels, and they were a big part of my early cinema viewing days. There is a great genre horror element to them as well, and there are some good stories embedded in there, and some very quirky and quite relatable character moments throughout all the films, I would say, which I think make the films very accessible and also very timeless. And maybe some films are more popular than others, I grant you that, but be that as it may, I think, for me anyway, each of the films offers its own share of thrills and excitement. And so with that, just wanted to let those of you who are Jaws sequels fans out there, I just want to let you know that I am with you, and I hope you are well. So anyway, sorry about this. I will end there, and I will talk to you very soon. Cheers.